Today we're going to talk about Bellwork for English 1. Our Bellwork is going to consist of sentence unscrambling, sentence imitating, sentence combining, sentence expanding, and grammar. We have 2 learning goals today. Number 1, to acquire the tools to build better sentences, and number 2, to analyze, study, and imitate sentences of great authors so that we may turn around and use those same models in our everyday writing. In our Bellwork, there are 4 strategies we're going to use. Number 1, chunking to imitate. Number 2, sentence unscrambling. And number 3, sentence combining. And finally, 4, sentence imitating. But today, we're just going to focus on the first strategy, chunking to imitate. Before we go any further, you're going to need the following things. Number 1, some paper. Number 2, a pen. Because what we're going to do now is we are going to practice exactly what you are going to be doing during the Bellwork in my class. So take a moment right now and grab a sheet of notebook paper and your pen, and we'll come back together in just a moment. If you need to pause me right here, please go ahead and do so. Then when you come back, please hit the play button. Okay, now that you have your paper and your pen, let's talk about exactly what we're going to do. Please make sure that you follow my instructions exactly and take notes, because tomorrow I will be giving you a grade on whether or not you have done exactly what I've asked you to do. So let's look at the directions. The directions say, you will receive 2 sentences. You must determine which one is divided into meaningful chunks. Then copy the sentence on your paper. So let's talk about what a meaningful chunk is. A meaningful chunk is a chunk of a sentence that is divided into word parts. So let's look at the next slide because I have 2 sentences for you. One which is divided into meaningful chunks and the other which is not. So we'll need to see which one is the correct choice. All right. So when you come into my class, you will have 2 sentences on the board, A and B. One of these is divided correctly into meaningful chunks. The other is not. So the very first thing you need to do is you need to read it to yourself and pause at the slash mark and decide which one of these is separated into meaningful chunks. So let's do that now. Let's read sentence A. I'm going to read sentence A in my head silently, but for our purposes, I'll be reading it aloud and pausing at each of the slash marks. So, let's start with sentence A. I am not ashamed to confess that I am ignorant of what I do not know. So that's sentence A. So you need to decide in your head if the slash marks are placed appropriately. So let's move on to sentence B. I'm again going to pause at the red slash marks. I am not ashamed to confess that I am ignorant of what I do not know. Okay, so we've read both sentence A and sentence B. I've paused at each of the slash marks, and I've thought in my head which one I think is correctly chunked. So, at this point, you should have an idea in your head whether the answer is A or B. Before we move on, make sure you have an answer. If you chose B, you were correct. The answer is, I am not ashamed to confess that I am ignorant of what I do not know. Now this quote by Cicero is correct because it has been appropriately chunked into phrases. Okay? So, the first phrase, I am not ashamed, if I wanted to, I could actually stop the sentence there. My next phrase, to confess, is a verbal phrase. To plus confess is a verb phrase. The next chunk, that I am ignorant, is a noun clause. And the final chunk of what I do not know begins with a preposition. Each of these phrases or clauses is separated appropriately. Now, the next thing I need you to do is write down the entire quote using correct MLA citation. We will be using MLA citation to cite anything that is not our own words. These words did not come from us, they came from Cicero. So we need to make sure that we give Cicero credit. So in order to do that, we need a couple of things. We need quotations before the quotes and at the end of the quotes. Directly following the quotation marks, we welcome the author's name with parentheses, followed by the author's name, and we close the author's name with another parentheses. The period comes at the end of a sentence. If we take the period and we place it over here after the word no and inside the quotation marks, Cicero, the author, gets left hanging out in the wilderness. And we do not want to do that because this quote is by Cicero, so we need to give him credit close to the quote that he said. And so that is why his name comes inside the parentheses and inside the period. The period ends the sentence, so it has to come after the parentheses. So at this point, we need to talk about what your paper should look like. On your notebook paper, you should have a title. My title is Bellwork. The next thing you should have is the date that we discussed this, and then some notes right under it about what the concept is that we're discussing. So, the first concept that we're going to be working on in Bellwork is chunking to imitate. So you should have that there. Then you need a paraphrase about what the task is that I've asked you to do. So, our task is, you're going to have 2 sentences. I've paraphrased the next part. Decide which one sounds best in my head because it is separated meaningfully. Okay? So you should have a paraphrase. You could have the exact words. That's okay too. It does not matter to me. So a paraphrase or the exact words. The very next thing you need to have is the correct answer. So you had 2 choices if you remember correctly. You had choice A and choice B. We decided together that choice B was the correct answer. So you need to make a note about that. Then I asked you to copy the quotes exactly as it should be, using parenthetical documentation and MLA citation. So your quote should look like this. Open quotation marks. I am not ashamed to confess that I am ignorant of what I do not know. Close quotation marks. We have to give credit to our author in parentheses, who is Cicero, and our sentence always, always, always ends with a period. So your paper should look very similar to mine. It doesn't need to look exactly like mine because these are your notes, okay, not my notes. All right, so just to recap, we are starting with chunking to imitate for Bellwork. You're going to get 2 sentences. You need to decide which of the 2 is correctly chunked. Remember, you have those slash marks that you need to look at and make sure they're in the right places. And then you need to make sure that you add it to your notes. Okay? So the next time you see one on the board when you come into class, you just need to skip a line, write the new date, and make your decision, and then copy the quote as it appears using correct MLA citation. So when you come to class, I expect your paper to look very similar to mine, and you will get full credit for the day.